Michael, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing okay, all things considered. Nice to see you.
Yeah, that's true with the state of the world. So I guess my first question, kind of humorous, is, are you content?
Yeah, that is a good first question. I'm trying to be, I suppose. It's springtime in New York City out, so that helps me stay optimistic.
Awesome, awesome. I just had to go with that opening line because that's the popular refrain that the characters greet each other with in your film. All right, so I got a lot of questions. I dug your movie. So my first question, I guess, is how do you get the script from, I guess, Angela Barassa? And do you know like what was her impetus for writing it? Because when I first saw the film, I really got like an Aldous Huxley Brave New World vibe, and that's what intrigued me. So I wanted to see if that's what kind of lured you on the project.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the script came to me in 2020 actually, which is a while ago now, but as it goes with independent filmmaking, these things take a while. Um, so I read it during the pandemic, during like the summer of 2020, I remember. And I think maybe when I was initially looking for some sort of escapism to direct something again right away after my last feature, and maybe a masochist, I'm realizing, because it was there was a lot in the script in this dystopian setting that wasn't so dissimilar to the world we were living in during the pandemic, right? There were characters immediately in the first few pages who weren't allowed to touch in this world. So I was couldn't help but kind of project what we as as a society were going through at the same time. But I think when I talked with Angela very soon after and talked about her inspiration, I know there's the inherent sort of Adam and Eve qualities to the story that I was attracted to, as that sort of allegory. But she had written the script well before the pandemic, not inspired by it at all, but more this data that she was seeing where there's a younger generation that seems to be connecting over social media uh, more so than physically, and this idea that that generation is not having as many sort of romantic, intimate relationships as society is usually used to, and taking that and kind of throwing out, taking sex out of the equation altogether in this world, uh,
Mm.
in this sort of dystopia. So there was a few things that I thought were that I wanted to press on a little bit, and kind of it evolves and builds out from there. But at the core of the story, I think that the outside of the sensational aspects of it, the thing that I was most inspired by was, this idea of just exploring the human condition. This is a story with characters who are on this so-called vitamin to suppress having to feel. And what does it look like, when you have adults and young adults kind of going through the basic evolution of human emotion for the first time. And that just felt like a fun place to play, or to explore, at least in the story.
You know what? You're going into my next line of thought because I previously brought up Soma Huxley's vitamin that keeps everybody pacified, but in your opening scene, you have a guy who's obviously unable to handle what's going on in his life, and believes that putting everything in that bin to get exonerated, starting over with or friends, is the way to be truly happy, to not have negative feelings and kind of like be zombie like in that approach. And so the whole concept of the vitamin is extremely intriguing, and basically the concept of why everybody was brought into this society. So when you were delivering that with your actors, right? I love how it was done because it's not overreaching. It's not like they take the vitamin and they're just like, falling apart. But the effect is instant on and instant off, right? So was there any thought with Angela and maybe having it linger longer in that sense?
Uh, yeah, interesting. Well, I suppose you remind me of kind of a maybe like a universal direction I at least gave the actors when we were talking about this, exactly what this would look like, with the kind of the two different modes that the characters have in the story. And I know one thing from the beginning is I didn't want it to have that sort of like zombie robotic effect. It's essentially a glorified antidepressant, but from as we established in that opening scene that you referenced, it's these are real people behind the characters, or they have baggage that they're bringing into this community that they're choosing to live in. And that direction that I gave all of the actors, I think, was just that there's still soul behind your eyes. And I think that I wanted them to each kind of interpret that as they would, not in any sort of prescription way. And I think that lent to what I was most interested in exploring, is kind of like what happens when those cracks open up, and what can we see, in that character. And Griffin Newman plays that character in that opening scene, is clearly like a guy who is escaping some sort of heavy emotional trauma, some sort of rupture in his life. So I don't think it's so wild to think that if you slip from your medication that you're on, even for a day, that we're going to start to see those cracks, even if we've washed out your memory, so to speak. But that's I hope I'm getting at your question. But I think these are the things that were circulating in my mind as we were adapting that for the screen physically, what that would look like.
Bravo, great answer. That makes a lot of sense, actually. The thought of it as an antidepressant, that if you're off it, you're going to experience like an instant change. So that's a good answer. So let's talk about Bel and Nick, right? Because they go through this extraordinary journey over the narrative, right? Because they kind of discover all facets of the human condition together and separately, and it really leads to them, building a good romance together. So, talk about casting them, and were they your initial choices, or did you meet with a lot of actors for these parts?
Sure. Yeah. I love Bel and Nick. I can't remember, the way independent financing and getting these things off the ground, there's usually a long road of development that is more infuriating and just takes away from, it's part of the process, but takes away from the actual work you're doing. But Nick and Bel, I both loved, and they came on actually pretty early, to the point where, there's starts and stops as you're making a movie. But the benefit of that, I suppose, is that I was able to have many conversations with them, months, and even in Bel's case, years before actually filming. And the rehearsals are always this sort of like fleeting term on film sets, or at least the film sets I've been on. So you don't really have that proper time to do it that way, which is the way I would like to do it, certainly. But in the meantime, you talk about the role a lot. Bel was someone who, it speaks to her ability. I believe, there was a matter of days. We were filming on set, and she had just flown in from somewhere in Eastern Europe, where she had been working on a heavy World War II period drama for many months before making this movie. And I think it speaks to what a talent she is, that she can just kind of snap into that mode. But I think all of those conversations leading up, and her own instinct, those sort of decisions, the way she interprets a character, lend into how she's able to pull that up on screen. And the same with Nick. He was someone who, is a much different sort of actor, certainly than Bel, but had an approach that was very holistic, I suppose. He's someone who planted himself on I keep on referencing the location. We shot in a very secluded area in Western New York, that I think also helped that we were away from civilization as we made it, or we tried to create that the sense of that on screen. But when people are working in an isolated location like that, I suppose when you're making art, it lends to kind of be away from everything else. There's no more distraction, so we could really kind of, even though we didn't have a lot of prep time there, it gave us time. That's all we were doing, is talking about these roles, exploring it. To some degree, this is a very small independent film. So also speaking to what a great cast I have, is a lot of times, certainly because we're shooting an ensemble and we're shooting single camera in this very stylized way, you're seeing really the first or second take sometimes out of a lot of them. That's how good they are, because there's really just no time to do anything else. So it's really it's unfortunately a much more conservative style of shooting that I would like. But yeah, I guess it speaks to, when you have great talent, you can really lean on them and rely on them, so to speak. to create something that's compelling on screen. I'm glad to hear they have good chemistry. I think so too.
You know what? That's remarkable because that leads into my next question, especially with I love Jeff Min, by the way. I interviewed him a few times, and he's a tremendous actor.
He's
So
great.
the scenes between the ensemble where they're kind of discovering each other, and even with Belle and Nick, where they're discovering their bodies, they're almost like kindergartners. Oh, what's this? How do we do this? And they're creating terms for things that they don't know or have forgotten or have been suppressed, right? So from my eye, I'm like, wow, there must have been a lot of rehearsal time to get this blocking down to make it seem so natural. But you're saying you didn't really have much time. Did the ensemble just kind of jump into it and run with it and get those great scenes done so quickly?
In reality, yeah, that's unfortunately what the situation is a lot of the times. Very very minimal rehearsal time. We had some, but just not in a glorified, not the way it used to be in the old Hollywood days. I would love to get back to that, frankly. But yeah, it's a lot. It's there. We incorporated a lot of play into that, and really, even though a lot of it, a lot of what you're describing comes from Angela's script, this sort of naivete that the characters had. We talked about that, having childlike sensibilities in adult bodies, and what does that look like? And I think there was really no wrong answer. It was just finding something that worked, and then that seemed to be compelling and natural to the scene, and then we would kind of adjust from there. But a lot of it is really just kind of finding it in the moment, so to speak, and having again those preparatory conversations. So each one of the actors in the ensemble was able to kind of bring a certain idea forward. And I think my job as director a lot of times, certainly on this film, is kind of acting like a group therapist, where I'm listening and I'm just trying to react and adjust based on what they're bringing me emotionally, certainly for this story at least.
How long was the overall shoot time for the primary shoot?
Oh, just something like 20 days.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I mean, you really can't tell that on film because everything looks so rehearsed, especially as far as the blocking. All right, so let's move away from the actors and the characters and go into the subject matter because I saw the film Cold, right? And I wasn't aware that it was more of a sci-fi romance as opposed to like a hard-edged dystopian thriller, right? Because in the beginning, when I saw Or Friends, my thought was like, okay, how bad are these bad guys? How villainous are they? What's going to happen to this couple? Are they running for their lives? But what happens is very interesting because they kind of rediscover love and are honest about that feeling, right? So my question to you is, did you want to make the Or Friends guys more menacing, right? Was there ever a thought to be like, okay, maybe these people should be more darker than they finally are in the final act, or were you like, okay, let's not make them be this overarching villainous people, but they actually have this idea of what they think this utopia should be from that great scene with Darcy, who I love, by the way.
Yeah, Darcy's great as well. Yeah, there are a few things there, I suppose. I guess the short answer is no. I wasn't so much interested in making them evil. I feel like we've seen that a lot of times before too, and I feel like I'm glad you saw it, Cole. I appreciate that. I'm unfortunately, this is the reality for a lot of filmmakers. I'm not, much as I'd like to be, not involved in the marketing of this film at all. So trailers get cut, artwork gets made, and you see them kind of spinning something in a certain way, and I get that there's a commercial aspect to it, but I often anecdotally describe myself as a bit genre agnostic, I suppose. I guess it does check the thriller checkbox at some parts. Maybe has science fiction elements, but I think all stories are romantic. I was trying to tell something that was honest, even though it was in this kind of this silly dystopian sort of world. But I think the dystopian aspects of it, I think Our Friends are an allegory for not so different from the big corporations that are in our world that are making subtle decisions for us all the time. Are they evil? Maybe in reality, but in this film, I was just cautious of becoming aware of that. I think good sci-fi and good dystopian type stories, they should act like a mirror, right, and reflect back on what society, what our society is actually like, and maybe serve as a bit of a cautionary tale. But we were designing the our friends kind of entity from the ground up, and what they were, as if they're building this world that our characters live in. All of those are decisions we have to make. What their devices look like, what sounds come out of the screens that they watch their content on, and I think it at first look, this is sort of a utopia. They have this sort of like boutique living style that everything is curated for them. But when you step back, I wanted it to be more about a story where finding agency and realizing what it's like to have free will, to have choice. And even though these might be making you content and creating like a pleasant vibe, at the end of the day, is it so good if you're not choosing it, right? Maybe that's right for some people, but I think that's what the thrust of this story was about. Not so much making this entity evil, but using them as this sort of allegorical character that is a substitute for a lot of the big entities in our modern world that make these sort of decisions for us.
Wow, great answer, bravo. So let's go into the production design elements, because I really thought that you got the most out of your budget, right?
Mm.
And like, the use of the devices, the wellness connection or whatever. But I really like the animation, that the animation that they saw when they got up in the morning after doing this yoga. That's almost like, like a children's cartoon, to be like, oh, you're doing this and you're doing that. And it kind of like lulls them into their whole day, So talk about like the thought of where that came from. Was that in Angela's script, or was that something that you came up with?
Angela's script they were watching something kind of redundant on the screen, just something like almost like children's animations. But when it came time to actually fill those screens, this is one of the many parts of filmmaking that I like, is you get to work with so many other great collaborators and artists. And there was a artist, this Italian artist named Luca Donato, who I'd been following on Instagram for years, who creates these sort of infinite loops, similar to the ones that he made bespoke versions of for the movie, that usually encompass these character that is either happy or sad, and it kind of fluctuates between the two. And I thought there's not a better visual metaphor than that. So what if that's literally the content that they're watching, like children, like watching some sort of just redundant thing on the television. So that became this fun way to incorporate that, but also I thought it was just perfect for the screen and for the film, and to kind of get into the mindset of these characters. But also, yeah, in the production design, we're really, I tried to do. I think Angela's script initially had much more kind of traditional, big budgeted science fiction things, which were great, but I just knew we didn't have the scope for that. So I really had to strip things down and tried to make something more minimalist. We found, an old college campus in the area that we were shooting that felt like it had, sort of brutalist architecture, which I liked, but it felt like a place where we could augment. And so we do a lot of digital map paintings to expand upon that. We had trees. I was watching Brave New World, certainly, what you're referencing was something I was on my mind, but then I became obsessed with Truffaut's Fahrenheit 451, which also kind of takes place in a very beautiful film with a much bigger budget, but it does feel stripped back and minimal. So like we're pulling from these sort of places of what can we do with the environment we're shooting in, and we were also coincidentally, the area we were shooting in is where the old Kodak headquarters were. So there was these, which are basically abandoned now. And we had access to these old office buildings, which kind of are stuck in time from the 60s and 70s, their heyday, from when they were kind of just left to rot in so many ways. But this, to me, in this sort of kind of retro dystopia we were building, felt like a perfect place for our palette, for our characters to work. And that gives our art team an ability not to build from scratch, but to build upon and to augment that world a little bit to something that felt just honest to the world that they're living in. Hopefully, at the end of the day.
You achieve it, mate. Like I said, I love the animation. I love the use of the devices to program their day. All right, so I got two more questions for you. And so I was really impressed by the sound, right? Because I thought that like the soundtrack with like the humming and like the kind of like the upbeat 50s music. It's hard to describe for the audience without them hearing it, but it really adds a key element to the film that's interesting because it's kind of sinister and creepy, but then the cheeriness of it all kind of lends to the fact that like okay, maybe the Orr friends really do have the idea of just making everybody placidly happy. So talk about who designed those songs and adding them to the film.
Thanks. Yeah, there was a lot of thought that went into the music. That was one thing. Angela's script, ironically, didn't have any music, but that was by design. You know, these characters hadn't experienced music before, so a lot of the things you hear in the movie are, you know, not part of the story, but are there. But I, at the same time, I knew I wanted to play with vocals in the score from the beginning. It's something I played a lot of chorus music and this choirs on set. I didn't quite know why yet, but it felt right. And then I started realizing it's this idea you have these characters kind of going through emotions. So I wanted, you know, kind of a so-called Greek choir in a way to be commenting on that. And so we filled up the soundtrack, you know, with this idea of this unforeseen character that's kind of observing them, and this because they're also living right in a surveillance state. We literally cut to the CCTV television a lot, right? They're being observed, so it felt right that the music is also commenting. Maybe it's the voice of the our friend, maybe it's kind of something in the middle. And I worked with this great composer, Nate Heller, who we had these conversations, and then he interpreted that by putting his own vocalizations, literally his voice into the score, and then getting a feminine voice as well to kind of comment between the Joy and William character, so that they kind of become their conscience in a way. And then we mix that in with this literal a cappella group from the '60s out of France that I love called the Swingle Singers, who do, you know, Bach and Mozart covers vocally, and with the sort of more heavy orchestral music that we use in the score, it just all kind of became this collage that felt right to the story. And then one thing on that note that Nate did that I really appreciated was on that note that you know, had Angela had written that the characters don't know music or they can't hear music. Julia Shiplett's character at one point in this film is discovering music for the first time. So
It
her
hums, yeah.
character her character is humming, you know, what we know as a melody to the Bel Powley character. And Nate heard this, and so I had Julia kind of improvise something on the day. And when Nate heard this when he was scoring, he ended up incorporating that into the score that we're hearing. So by the time you see that scene in the movie, you've actually heard it as this kind of sonic motif many times in this way that you're not like conscious of, but it's just there. I love these sort of Easter eggs that you can put in movies, and that score and sound design can do. And then, you know, on top of that, our sound design from the Our Friends character is this world outside of music is just full of sound, and all of those choices, what's coming out of the devices, what's coming out of the screens, the hallways of the apartment complex that they live in. We thought about it almost like a theme park where there's like a sonic loop on in the background that's, you know, just kind of drab, but has maybe like a spa or like calming quality. And it's, you know, these are again, it's the subtle manipulation that's happening all around us that you can't quite put your finger on, but it's there. And I feel like living in a world like that would probably drive anybody crazy or want to, like, you know, compel them to break out, so to speak.
Awesome, awesome. All right, so I got one last question, but I just want to say, you know what? I've really enjoyed both of the films I've seen from you. So you're doing a banner job with your
Oh, thank
artistic
you very much.
vision. All right, so for the final question is, you know, for the Suits and the Metrics guys, what are you working on next? Do you have your next project lined up? Do you have anything you're involved with that you want to talk about?
Not that I want to talk about it, other than the fact that I'm heavy into writing right now, which is a very which is a great period because, you know, no one else is in the room, and I just get to kind of work on that privately until there'll be, you know, hopefully if it comes off the ground, there'll be 50 people working on it every day. But yeah, right now I'm doing something that's probably much more related to my first film in terms of theme and in terms of character, but it involves music, it involves sound, and yeah, I'm very excited about it, and hopefully hopefully I can be talking about it in the not too distant future.
Hope so too. Michael, thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you very much. Wonderful to speak with you.